In this Blender tutorial, I'll show you how to create this procedural weaved fabric material. And so if I zoom really close up to this material, you can see this material actually has a fabric weave texture. And right up here on the screen, I'll throw up the base texture that we're going to be creating for those fabric weaves. And so you can see if I zoom out here, it looks really nice on a fabric object. And after we create the procedural material, I'll show you how to join it together into this custom node group so you can control the look of the material. Now, I have this texture coordinate outside of the node group because I'm using the UVs. Because if you use the object coordinates, you can see that it doesn't really look that good. Materials that have a consistent pattern, like maybe brick or fabric or something, they don't always work so well with the object coordinates. So I'm going to use the UV coordinates instead. And that way, because this plane here was UV unwrap, you can see the fabric is going to curve along with the fabric folds. So the node group has these different values that we can control. So we have the overall scale to change the size of the material. Then we have the two different weave colors. So we have weave color 1, and then we also have weave color 2. So for example, I could maybe make this like a red color, and then for the second one, maybe make this like a yellowy color or something. So you can really get a different look of the fabric. Then we also have this roughness here, so I have it all the way up to 1 just because I don't really want it to be super reflective. You could turn it down if you want to, but it doesn't really look like fabric if it's super reflective. Then we also have the sheen weight, and so this is going to help to make it look more like fabric. And then we also have the sheen roughness. And then we also have this sheen tint here. And then we have two bump strengths, so we have the weave bump strength, and then we also have the noise bump strength. This is just some overall noise over the entire material. And if you'd like to purchase this procedural material and help support the channel, you can get this material on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page. The links are in the description. And if you'd like to purchase all of my materials, then definitely check out my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack, which comes with all of my materials pre-set up in Blender's asset browser with custom thumbnails, sorted catalogs, and customizable node groups. So once you've set up my Ultimate Material Pack as an asset library into Blender, you can just drag and drop the materials from the asset browser into your 3D scenes to add materials to your objects. You can also purchase my procedural material packs, which are packs of 10 materials, and you can purchase any of my materials individually on my Gumroad store. And to learn how to create more procedural materials, you can check out my Blender procedural material tutorial playlist here on YouTube. So real quick, I'll show you what I have set up in the 3D viewport if you want to set up the blend file the same way that I have. So I want to create a cloth which is going to be draped over a sphere just to preview the material. So I'll go to the add menu and I'll add a sphere, and then I'll go to the add menu and add a plane, and I'll bring the plane up. I'll hit tab to go to edit mode, and I'll scale the plane bigger like that. And then I'll use the object context menu and hit subdivide and just continue to subdivide it again and again until it's pretty detailed. Then I'll go back to object mode and I need to add the cloth physics. And I do have a cloth physics for beginners tutorial. If you want to watch that, I'll have a link in the description. But let's just go right over here to the physics, and with the plane selected, I'll add cloth, and then click on the sphere and I'll add collision. And then if I click back over to the cloth, let's scroll down here, and I'm going to go all the way down, scroll down here, and I'm going to check mark the self collision, and that'll make it look more realistic. And then because I do video editing in Blender, if I go right here to the playback, usually I have this sync setting right here set to sync to audio because that's better for video editing. But when I'm doing a simulation, it's better if I turn the sync here to play every frame. So just make sure the sync setting is set to play every frame. So now here on the timeline, I'll make sure I'm at the starting frame, and I'll hit the space bar to play, and that's going to simulate it. And if it's really laggy here in the viewport, then you could instead bake the simulation instead, but I'll just let it play out like this. So I'm just going to continue to let this play until the cloth isn't really moving anymore. So I'll hit the space bar to pause the animation. That is pretty good. So now I can go back over here to the modifiers, click on the drop down and apply the cloth modifier. And then I can select the sphere and I can just delete it because we don't need it, or you can leave it there underneath the cloth if you want to. And then I'll select the cloth here and I'll shade it smooth. I'm also going to press Ctrl+1 to add a subdivision surface with 1 level so you can see it's more detailed. And then also I want to give it some thickness. So I'll click on add modifier, and I'll search for the solidify modifier, and I'll click and drag and drop the solidify before the subsurf. And then you can also change the thickness of the cloth here if you want to. And this cloth is already UV unwrapped. If I just open up a new workspace here and just go to UV editing, you can see because we just added this from an original plane, you can see it's UV unwrapped, and that's a great UV unwrap. It's all opened up and flat. So that will be great for our object. So I'll go back here to this layout. But then I want to scale the objects down closer to the real life scale in Blender. So I'm going to scale this object down by like a 0.4 press Ctrl A and apply the scale. So this object is still a little bit big, but that is better to the real life scale in Blender because it's a bit smaller. And I'll bring this object down right there. And then also when we pressed Ctrl A and applied the scale, you can see the solidify is now thicker. So back over here on the solidify settings on the modifier properties, we can just turn that thickness down so it's more thin. So then I also added a camera here, and I just pointed the camera right at the object. And if you click here to go to the object data properties of the camera with the camera selected, I turned the focal length up to 90 just to kind of zoom it in a bit and make it look a bit more flat. You can also rotate this object here along the Z-axis to get it to a point that you like. And then also if you go here to the output properties, I set the resolution X and Y to the same value so it is a square image. And then I'll go into the rendered viewport mode and I'll show you the lighting. So for the lighting, I added these 3 different area lights right here. So this first area light right here is set to 200, and I'm kind of using this as like a rim light on the back. And then also this here, this is kind of like another rim light on the back. And this other light here is set to 100. And then the last light here is also set to a power of 100. And this is just kind of shining down on the side to add some nice bright lighting to the object. And then also to get some nice realistic lighting and reflections, if I go here to the world properties, I added in this Machine Shop 02 1K HDRI from polyhaven.com. Link will be in the description. And I downloaded the 1K HDR version. So you can click on the yellow dot here next to color, you can choose environment texture, and then click on the open button and open up the downloaded HDRI. Now let's also go here to the render properties, and I can open up the film tab here, and I'm going to check mark this transparent button so that the background is transparent, so it'll still light the scene, but you can't see it in the background. I'm also going to open up the color management here on the very bottom, and I'll use the view transform of Filmic, and I'll set the look to very high contrast. So I'm now going to click right over here to go to the shading workspace. So I have the 3D viewport right over here. I'll go into the rendered viewport mode, and then I have the shader editor right over here. So I'll select the object. Let's click on new to add a new material, and I can just call this weaved fabric. And then I'll also be using the Node Wrangler add-on in the video. So if you don't have the Node Wrangler enabled, you can click on Edit, you can go to the Preferences, and then you can go to the Add-ons tab, and you can go here to the Search, and you can search for Node, and then you can just check mark the Node Wrangler add-on, and I'll show you how to use it in the video. So the first thing that we want to do is go to the Add menu, and we're going to search for a wave texture. We're going to add a wave texture to create the first set of lines, which are eventually going to become the weaves of fabric. So let's hold down the Control and Shift key and select the wave texture. And then with the wave texture selected, I'm going to press Control T. That's using the feature of the Node Wrangler add-on, and it's going to add the texture coordinate and mapping nodes. Now, as I mentioned, I want the fabric weaves to go along with the curve or the folds of the fabric. So if I use just like the object coordinates, that's really not going to work so well. So I'm going to use the UV coordinates instead. So I'll put the UV into the vector. And then you can see now that the waves are moving along with the folds of the fabric. So I'll select these nodes and just kind of move them back here, and those are going to be the mapping nodes. So now let's change the wave texture settings. So on this X here, I'm going to change it to Y instead, so it's going in the opposite direction, and then I'll turn this scale here to 60. So now what I want to do is select this mapping node, and I'm going to duplicate the mapping node with Shift D and just drop it right here. And we'll use this mapping node later to slightly move around where the weaves are, where the fabric weaves are. I'm now going to select this wave texture, and I'll press Control Shift D to duplicate the node but keep the wire plugged up, and I'll drop it here. Let's Control Shift and select it to preview it. And then on this one, I want to change the Y back to X instead. So now we have 2 different waves going in opposite directions. So we're going to use this to create the fabric weaves. So I'm now going to join them together. So I'll go to the Add menu, and I'm going to search for a math node. We'll drop the math node right here. And on the math type here, I'm going to set the type to multiply. So under functions, choose multiply. Now we can put the color into the top one, and then the wave texture color, that can go into the bottom one. And I can Control Shift and select the multiply to preview it. So now if I zoom in here, you can see we have this nice pattern. Now what I want to do is I want to make this wave texture be a bit more thin so it looks like weaves of fabric. So I'll duplicate this multiply and drop it here. And on the multiply type here, under functions, I'm going to change this to add. So now you can see if I drag this value here, I actually want to take the color and I want to put that into the bottom value. Now if I drag this value here, you can see it's going to make it more thin or less thin. Because if I Control Shift and select the add to preview it, you can see if I drag this value around, it's going to make it lighter and darker. And that is because white equals 1 and black equals 0. So we can drag the value around to make more values or less values. So specifically, the value that I'm going to use is a negative 0.65. So a negative 0.65. So you can see it's really thin, but this one is more thick. So if I put this into the multiply, you can see now it's just showing up in these small little areas. So it's starting to look like one small bit of the fabric weave. So I'll drag these out of the way here, and let's box select all these nodes. I'll press Control J. Control J is going to join it together into a frame just to keep the nodes nicely organized. And I'll select the frame and press F2 to give it a label, and I'll just rename this to Weaves 1. So I now want to make another group of weaves, so I'm going to click and drag and box select all these, and I'll press Control Shift D to duplicate the nodes but keep the wires plugged up. And if I select the frame and press F2 to change the label, I can call it to Weaves 2. So let's Control Shift and select this one to preview it, and you can see right now it looks the same. But I'm now going to go right back up here to the top one, and on this top one, if I Control Shift and select it to preview it, this top one, I'm going to rotate it, and I'm going to rotate it on the Z axis, and I'm going to type in 90 here on the mapping Z, so rotate that over. So now you can see if I select this one here, you can see this one is horizontal and this one is vertical. So I now want to join them both together. So I'll go to the add menu, and to mix the two colors together, I can search for a mix color. So we'll drop this here, and then on the mix type, I'm going to change it to lighten because we just want to add the light values because the weaves are the light values. So I can plug this value into the color A, and then I can plug this math node here into color B. And I can Control Shift and select it to preview it. And if I zoom in here, now you can kind of see both of them on top of each other, but it doesn't look that good. Let's take the factor and turn that all the way up to 1, so it's adding both of them. And now you can see it's kind of showing these little X shapes. But what I want to do is move one of the weaves over so that they're not overlapping each other. So let's go right up here to the Weaves 1, and we can take this mapping location X value, and I can move this around and I can stick it here so it's right in between both of them. And I'm going to hold down the Shift key as I drag the value to make it more sensitive. So now I can just move this around, and I want to stick it right here so it's right in between. And specifically, I'm going to go with a value of 0.055, hit enter, 0.055 there on the location X, so now you can see it's right there in the center. So it's starting to look like the fabric weave. However, you can see that there's some big open areas, so what I want to do is duplicate all these weaves, we'll offset them a little bit, and then we'll join them all together, so there's going to be 4 different groups of weaves. So I'll box select all these nodes here, so the lighten and the 2 weaves, and I'll press Control Shift D to duplicate the nodes but keep the wires plugged up. We can also select the mapping here, and we can drag this down here kind of in the center, and let's Control Shift and select this lighten. You can see it's the same thing, so I want to mix them both together. So I'll select one of the lightens and I'll duplicate it and drop it here. We can take this lighten result, we can put that into color A, and then this lighten result, we're going to put that one into color B. So I can Control Shift and select the lighten to preview it, and you can see because they're on top of each other, it's not really doing anything. So if we go to Weaves 1, we're going to leave this one how it is because we just moved that over. And then if we go to Weaves 2, this one will completely leave where it is because it's fine where it is. Now if we go down here to the other weaves, let's select this, press F2, we can call this Weaves 3, and then select this one, press F2, call this Weaves 4. So for Weaves 3 and Weaves 4, I'm going to move these just a little bit. So I'm going to take this location X and turn it to 0, but then this one here, I'm going to turn this up on the location Y, and that's going to move it down. And I'm going to use the same exact value, so the value is 0.055, so 0.055, and that way it's going to be in the very center. So you can see by moving that on the Y axis, it's in the very center. Now we just need to take one more, which is on top, and we need to move it and stick it right in here to finish the weave pattern, because you can still see there's an empty space there. So if I go down here to Weaves 4, I want to take the X and Y, I want to click and then drag down and let go so I can change them both at the same time. You can see what this is doing by changing the X and the Y is it's moving it slightly over, so it's moving it down and over, and I'm going to change these to the same value. So again, change it to a 0.055 on both of them, and that's going to stick it right in there. So now you can see we have this really cool weave pattern, and it looks like there's these fabric weaves going in and out. So that's going to be the base texture for the weaves. So let's now put these into the bump. So what I can do is take the principled shader and the material output and drag it down here, and I can take the light and result and I can put that into the normal to give it some bump, and let's Control Shift and select the principled shader to preview it. Now you can see there's some really weird shading issues, and that's because I need to convert the color data into normal data that the shader can use. So I'll go to the add menu and I'll search for the bump node, and we'll drop the bump node between the lighten and the principled shader, and the lighten result can go into the height value to convert it to bump data. So if I zoom in here, you can see it's nice and bumpy, but I'm going to turn this to a much smaller strength value of like 0.4 so it's more subtle. Now I also want to add a bit of subtle noise all over the fabric just to make it look a little bit more fuzzy and soft. So I'll go to the add menu and I'll search for a noise texture, drop this right down here, and then I can take the same mapping, we can put the vector here into the vector of the noise texture, and then I can Control Shift and select the noise texture to preview it, and I'll change some of the settings. So I'll turn the scale to like 150, so it's pretty big, and I'll turn the detail to 15, and I can turn the roughness up to like a 0.7, so it's even more detailed. So now we're going to duplicate this bump, and we're going to stick it here after this one, so the normal can go into the normal, but we now have this extra height value that we can plug data into. So we'll take the factor and put that into the height value, and then I can Control Shift and select the principled shader. So now I can see there's this bump strength, which is just some noise, and then this bump strength, which is the fabric weave. So I'm going to box select all these nodes and hit Control J to add a frame, just to keep it nicely organized because the material is getting a little bit large, so that we can remember what everything does. And I'll select the frame and press F2 to give it a label, and I can just call it bump. Now I want the pattern of the fabric to be a little bit more random. So if I go back over here, back to the texture coordinate and mapping, I'm going to add a noise texture here to distort the other waves. So what I'm going to do is hold down the Shift key, and I'm going to right click and drag with the Shift key held, and I'm going to draw a line over all these and then let go. And that is going to reroute them through this reroute here. So it's really just doing the same thing as the one before it, but that way we can stick a node in here. So let's drag these back here, and I'll go to the add menu, and I'm going to search for a noise texture, drop this here, and you can see it's distorting that texture that we gave it. But let's just change the settings, and then we're going to make it less strong so it's not distorting it as much. So I'm going to turn this scale here on the noise to like 120, and then the detail here, I'll turn it all the way up to 15. So now I can search for a mix color. We'll drop the mix color here, and what we can do is we can use the mix color to mix between the mapping, which isn't distorted, and the noise texture, which is distorted. So we're going to put the color into color B of the noise, and then the original mapping, which isn't distorted, we're going to put that into color A. And then on the mix type here, let's change this to the linear light instead. So now I can drag the factor around, and it's going to be more distorted or less distorted. And just to preview this better, let's Control Shift and select the lighten so we can see what it's doing. So you can see it's really distorted right now, but if I drag the factor way down, it's going to be less and less distorted. And I'm going to make it a very, very, very small number, so there's just a tiny bit of distortion. So the value that I'm going to use is a 0.002, just a 0.002. So now you can see there's just a little bit of noise, and it looks a little bit more random. So that's just going to make it look a bit more natural. And then also we can box select these nodes, press Control J to join them into a frame, and I can press F2 to add a label, and I can just call this mapping. But this texture coordinate we're going to leave out here because we're not going to be joining this in the final node group. Now we still haven't made the base color yet, so right up here we're going to create a node group which is going to be the base colors. Now what I want to do is make the ones which are going vertical be one color, and then the ones which are horizontal to be another color. So to do this, we're going to take the light in here and we'll duplicate it and drop it here, and then what we want to do is just mix the vertical ones together, and then we'll have another one which is just going to mix the horizontal ones. So if I Control Shift and select this, you can see that's vertical, so we'll put this one into the color A. If I Control Shift and select this one, that one's horizontal. If I Control Shift and select this one, that's the other vertical one, so that's weaves 3. So I'll put this one in the extra socket. Then I'll select the lighten, and I'll press Shift D, duplicate it, and drop it here. And then we can take the other ones, which is this one, that is horizontal, so we'll put that into the extra socket. And then we can also take weaves 2, that's the other horizontal one, and we can put that one into color A. So now if I Control Shift and select this to preview it, you can see we just have the horizontal ones here, and we just have the vertical ones there. So now I want to duplicate the lighten again, and on this lighten here, I'm going to just change this back to mix, and I'll drop this here, and then I'll duplicate it and drop this one down here, and we're going to put the lighten result for this one into the factor, and then this lighten result is going to go into the factor. And why we're doing this is because the black and white datas of these lightens here, these textures, they can go into the factor, and that's going to determine what part is going to be color A and what part is going to be color B. So now we can make all the different custom colors. So for color A, on both of these, we're just going to turn them to fully black for both of them. But now here on the bottom ones, color B, we can make the horizontal weaves color, and then this one here, this is going to be the vertical weaves color. So for color B, I'm just going to make this kind of like a light blue, and then for the bottom mix color B, this one is going to be a bit more of a dark blue. And if you want to use the exact same hex values that I'm using to use the same exact colors, the top one here, the light blue color B, that is going to be a hex value of 93B7FF. And then the bottom one, this one, color B, this is going to be a hex value of 4E91FF. So now I want to mix them together again because we're mixing this together to make the final base color. So I'll select the lighten here and I'll duplicate it and drop it here. And we're using a light tint because we just want to add the light values, but we don't want to add the black values. So we can put the result into color A, and then this mix result can go into color B. And I can Control Shift and select this to preview it. And you can now see that all the vertical ones are light, and then all the horizontal ones are the dark blue. So now this light tint result can go into the base color, and I can Control Shift and select the shader to preview it. We can maybe drag this back here. And then also if we box select all these nodes here, I can press Control J to add a frame, and I'll select the frame and press F2 to give it a label. And I'm just going to call this like base color. So now this is definitely starting to look more like fabric. But it's like really shiny right now, so we want to take this roughness and we're going to turn it all the way up to 1. And then we can also open up the sheen here, and we'll turn the sheen weight all the way up to 1, and then the sheen roughness I'll turn down to just like a 0.3, and that can help to make it look a bit more like fabric. So you can see by turning up the sheen here, there's kind of like some little light areas along the ends there of the fabric, where you're looking at it sideways, it's going to be a little bit lighter. But we can now take the tint here, and we can also make this whatever tint color we want. So because this material is a blue color, I'm also going to make the tint kind of like a light blue. And the hex value for the sheen tint is going to be a hex value of 7495DF. And I can zoom out here, and that is it for the finished procedural material. So there's the finished material. So I'm now going to show you how to join it together into a custom node group so you can control the values and have more customization. So I'm going to click and drag to box select all the nodes, but I don't want to select the texture coordinate, and I also don't want to select the material output, but all the other nodes in between. And I'll press Control G to join it together into a node group. I'll hit the tab key to go out of the node group, and I can select the texture coordinate, drag it here, and then select both of them and drag them over here because they were really big, but now they're much smaller because we've compressed them. We can also make this a bit bigger so you can just see that a bit better. And then also if you click here to copy the name, I'll press Control C to copy and then paste it here into the node group, so it's called Weaved Fabric. So I'll hit the tab key to go into the node group, and I'll hit the N key to open up the side panel. And if I go here to the group sockets here on the group tab, I can double click on this to rename it, and I'll just rename that to shader. So now if I go right over here to this side, we have this group input, and we can plug all the values up to the group input to control them outside of the node group. So I first want to take the scale and plug the scale into the extra socket. And then if I click on the scale, I want it to be 1 value instead of 3. So I'll change the vector type to float instead, so it's 1 value. And then the default value, I can turn that back to 1. And then if I hit tab to go out of the node group, we'll turn the scale back to 1. So now you can see that's going to change the overall size of the material. So let's go back into the node group. Now I want to add the weave colors, so we're going to drag the group input way up here, drag it right over here to the base colors, and we can take color B, put that into the extra socket, and then color B here, put that into the extra socket. And just so you know, if you wanted to, you could duplicate the group inputs and drop it here, and then you could just plug up the different custom colors if you want to, and you could just continue to duplicate the group inputs and then plug them up. But I instead just like to move this around here. I just like that because that way I'm using less nodes. But if you don't like all the nodes and the wires like overlapping, you could always just duplicate the group inputs. So I'm just going to plug up both of those custom colors there, and then I'll double click on this to rename it, and I'll just rename this to Weave Color 1, and then this one here I'll rename to Weave Color 2. Then I want to add the roughness, so I'll drag this right down here next to the principled shader, and I can take the roughness value, put that into the extra socket, and then let's also take the sheen weight, put that into the extra socket. We can put the sheen roughness into the extra socket, and the sheen tint, put that into the extra socket. And then I also want to add the bump strengths, so let's just drag the node group back here, back behind the bumps, and I can take this first bump here. This one, if I zoom in here really closely, you can see this one here is just controlling the weaves, so I'll put the strength into the extra socket, and if I click on this to rename it, we'll rename it to weave bump strength. And then this other one here is the noise bump strength, so I'll put the strength into the extra socket, and this one I'll rename to noise bump strength. And then I need to select the group input and press Alt P to bring it out of that frame, and we'll drag it right over here to the end, and I can hit the N key to close the side panel, and I can hit the Tab key to go outside the node group, and we now have this nice custom node group to change all the values. So we'll just review the material. So we have the overall scale, then we also have the different colors. So I think blue looks pretty nice as like a base color, but you could of course go with red or brown or maybe just like a gray color, whatever colors you want. And then we also have the roughness here. I like keeping it at 1 because it's fabric, so it's not really that reflective. Then we also have the sheen weight, the sheen roughness, and then we also have the sheen color, and then we also have the weave bump strength, and then also the noise bump strength. So that's going to be it for this tutorial, so I hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you for watching. And if you'd like to help support the channel and purchase this procedural material, you can get that on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page. The links are in the description. And you can also check out my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack, which comes with all of my materials pre-set up for Blender's asset browser with custom thumbnails, sorted catalogs, and customizable node groups. And every time I create another 10 procedural materials, I'll update the material pack with all of the new materials. You can also purchase my procedural material packs, which are just packs of 10 materials. You can get any of my materials individually on my Gumroad store. And to learn how to create more procedural materials, definitely check out my Blender procedural material tutorial playlist. All the links are in the description. So I hope you enjoyed this, and thank you for watching.